you to conduct an experiment with me, which is part of the challenge that you'll hear about later in the message this morning. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to welcome somebody here close to you. Just turn around, stand up if you want to, but with something added on, something different. They're already at it. They welcome each other. When you greet the person, the greeting is just as simple as welcome. You don't even have to hold hands. You most certainly don't have to establish the eye lock, you know. It's just really welcome. But when you're saying the welcome, I'm inviting you to, in the silence of your own mind, articulate something about the beauty of that person's soul. Silently. You don't have to say it out loud. So just while you're saying welcome, there is another sentence in your consciousness about that person. Enjoy. Now I'm imagining there's a whole range of responses to the exercise, from acute discomfort to interest. But I will note that the tone of the room is quite different from all the other times that we have greeted each other, because there's something going on. It's almost like now you've got a secret love affair with this person that they don't know about, except that they do. Because it changes things. There's something about our energy exchange as human spiritual beings that allows for us to interact this way. And so it's the giving of what is natural in your heart, your affection and love, that sometimes we don't engage in. I'm going to invite you later to do a little more of that this week. You see, this month we've been talking about May McCarthy's book, The Path to Wealth, which is really a manual about so much more than financial riches. It's a spiritual manual for how to live a rich, full, spiritual, emotional, connected life. And last week she gave us 7 steps toward doing that, which we reviewed together. And the video is up online already, so if you missed that because of family engagements, you can catch up to speed and go online and see those 7 practical steps for keeping a daily appointment with something she calls your chief spiritual officer, the creative genius of the universe, so to speak. The second half of the book, she asks us to go deeper, like the advanced course, so to speak. And the chapter at the end that we're looking at today is Jumpstart Your Good with Giving. But she's very careful to tell us that, this is not about trying to control the universe, because it's practically impossible to force the universe to produce your good on your schedule at your time. There are, however, things that we can do, like we just did, to get us into the mood, to get us into the flow, to start the circulation of good, and that is the secret to opening the doorway to being in the receptive flow. Now, in the spiritual world, there are 2 excellent articulations of this teaching. The first one is Luke 6:38, and the second is the Catholic prayer for peace, sometimes assigned to Saint Francis of Assisi, which we hopefully will get to, because there is so much to deal with in this topic. Here is the heart of what May McCarthy says. She says we are to identify the area where we have a perceived or a real need, lack in our lives, and give from that, in that area, not somewhere else. Now, this is tricky. This is quite tricky, but it's something worth exploring. If you want more spaciousness around time in your life, you're feeling a crunch around time, you have to give your time. If you want more peace in your life, you're feeling a little frayed in your family, in your life, you're to give peace. If you want more love in your life, that's your thing then. That's your focus, to give right there in that area. Now, that's the tricky thing, because often we imagine that in the area where we have a perceived or a real lack, we can't possibly imagine giving more from it. And yet it is the antidote to being stuck. And it got me to thinking about our world right now, our country, and what's going on, and some of the things that are up, at least as I look at the world. Freedom, equality, consideration, safety, security. And I've been investigating, how rich would I be if I had all of that? And where in my life is there room for me to explore giving that? It's a shift, away from getting it to being an agent for its circulation. It even got me to think about our Constitution of the United States and how it lists examples of inalienable rights, God-given rights to the human condition. And in the early version of the Constitution, it said the preservation of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I got to thinking about that. How might I reframe that away from something to preserve and protect and to get, but to rather something that it's mine to be a purveyor of, to bring it into being in the world? How might I give more of the preservation of life to this world? When you start to think that question, and if you sit with sincerity in your heart, you're going to find the answer. I immediately, it came up for me. I could do better when it comes to the preservation of life. I could recycle better. I could be more mindful about the way I eat. And as I sat with it, more and more comes up. And these are good questions when it comes to happiness, when it comes to liberty. Well, we'll explore those in a moment. But it's worth articulating that challenge all over again. In those areas where we have a perceived or real need, it is difficult to imagine sharing more from where we perceive we have nothing. It's hard to think about giving your cash when you're struggling to pay your bills. It's difficult to think about giving some more time out when you're under pressure from work or your career or family obligations. Or if you've ever had your mind filled with turmoil, it's difficult to think of contributing peace to the world. And yet, that is the antidote. That is what unblocks the flow and causes the circulation to sit in place. I had to learn that. I have a very busy schedule, very busy career with lots of demand on my time. And every time it gets super busy and I start to get frayed, I start to look for where I can shave off things that I consider to be non-essential. And typically what goes first are things like where I volunteer. And what happens when I constrict and remove the very thing that opens the flow is that my schedule gets worse. It gets worse. It becomes more difficult to manage. So it's a habit I learned. I learned that when there is a perceived lack or a need, to instinctually contract, to hoard, to preserve, to hold on. And so I had to learn a new instinct, maybe even counterintuitive instinct. When there is a perceived lack or a real lack, now I know to look into my life in the exact area where things feel constricted and to begin to get that to flow. Sometimes people will say, yes, well, I'm practicing giving my this or my that, but what if they don't receive it well? Or what if they don't want it? And it's like, really? Move on. This is too important to be hooked up on that. And it may be that in your exploration, you'll discover that you could have been giving in a way that is not completely free from control and manipulation. It's possible. I don't know you. And when we look at freedom in the same way, and equality in the same way, and consideration, let's start with freedom. I want freedom. Where can I give that? And are there places in my life where I don't? Oh, yes, there are. And I learned it. I learned some bad habits. I recently heard a teacher say, freedom is to love someone is to give them freedom. And absolute love is to give them ultimate freedom. And that stuck in my mind because it called into my memory the way my mother loved me. Oh, she loved me. She loved me very much. But she tried to make me become the man she wanted me to become. And so there was a constant struggle between the two of us. And I did not always experience her love as something pleasant. It was difficult. I had learned a bad habit from her. And so I tended to love people in the way I had learned from her. And so I would also measure love in the terms of what I'd learned. So love to me meant that you did what I wanted. That's a difficult way to live. And even though I did not enjoy being controlled in the slight, and I yearned for freedom, I continued to love people in the way my mother loved me until I could unlearn that habit. I had to learn a new habit. I had to jumpstart my giving, my good, by giving people their freedom and trusting it. So I got married. But in all seriousness, all intimate relationships, all close friendships, all close partnerships create the foundation and the environment for trust and love so that these skeletons can be brought out of the closet. They create the environment where it is safe for us to be able to realize I've learned some bad habits. The same with equality and safety and consideration. They all go hand in hand, and they benefit well from the question, where do I not give people equality? You know, it's the sort of question that is deep and the one that we should sit with because it brings up stuff that typically is difficult to confess to. Are there areas where I don't treat people equally? Absolutely, you know. Earlier on, we greeted each other we're telling ourselves a story about the greatness of the person's soul. Many times in my life, I realize I'm greeting somebody and I'm telling myself a story about my prejudice and preference for them. There's a narrative in my mind going on about where we are not equal. I know nobody wants to admit that. But you know, when we do, it brings it out. Because don't you know, just in the same way that this morning we felt the raising up of the temperature of warmth and affection in the room through this silent communion, don't you know that we don't need to say to somebody, I judge you, in order for them to feel it? I can ask, I want more safety in the world, but how safe am I to be around? That's beautiful. How can I shift that from getting more equality and getting more safety and getting more consideration into being a purveyor of it? Can I do it before I expect the rest of the world to show up perfectly and do it as an example for me to follow later? It's similar with financial security, you know. It's difficult to imagine if you don't have enough money right now, how you could possibly be giving more or anything. And this is tender because yet that is the antidote to opening the flow. You know, sometimes when I talk to people about financial constriction, they'll say, well, I can't give financially now, so I'm giving in my time. And that all giving is wonderful, and yet that is not the area where they're experiencing the constriction. Typically, they have the flow in their time to be able to contribute from it, which is good and will improve that area. But it's the area that is stuck that deserves the tender attention. So I challenge people, I say, get something, an amount, $1 a week. That adds up to $52 a year, or a quarter or a penny, and make sure that every single week you give it to an organization where you do not feel controlled or manipulated and where you have heart resonance with their values, and make sure that that activity is present in your life like breathing is. Because, you know, if you do not have a giving practice, you haven't even yet enrolled in school. You're not even in the playing field. Nothing's going to move. Similarly with love. Similarly with equality. Well, those two prime articulations I mentioned earlier, one from the New Testament and the other from Catholicism. The first one was Luke 6:38. Does anybody know how that goes? It says, give, and it shall be given unto you. Given, it shall be given unto you. How? Pressed down, overflowing, pouring out on your lap, shaken together in good measure. And then it says something that is quite mystical, easy to miss. It says, for, in the King James Version, for with the same measure that ye meet, it will be measured again unto you. Meaning this. See, it's a story about consciousness. It means, for with the consciousness that you get into this giving, that is how the universe or the Lord or life or the creative genius returns the favor. In other words, do not think you can rig this system. You can't. You can't trick it. You see, you can't get in it for wealth of emotion, connection. No, if there is a secret at all to metaphysics, it would be in how to give clean-hearted and sincerely and openly, and not in how to receive or get. This is important. What is in my heart? Because this is what Luke is talking about. What is in your heart sets it out. Because if I get into this program of giving in order to create control and opportunity and domination, then the same measure is I create around me an environment of people who want to control, dominate, and have what is mine. No, instead, I got to get into it for another reason. So I got to keep in mind, this metaphysics is not a get-rich-quick scheme. It certainly isn't a get-something-for-nothing scheme. It's about incorporating into my life genuine, authentic, caring giving. To incorporate into my life something that is as natural as breathing, and yet something that I can forget, unlike breathing. To bring it back to life and see its amazing multiplying powers in my life. The second articulation I mentioned would be St. Francis of Assisi's prayer for peace, which begins how? Lord, make me an instrument of your peace, a purveyor of your peace. And then it goes on to say, wherever I spot a real or perceived lack in something, let me bring into play its opposite. That's what it says. Where there is hatred, let me bring love into play. Let me sow those seeds. And now this is one where it's very tempting to go look out into the world for the hatred that is out there. This would be one that is a good place to practice inside. Not in others, in me. Where in my consciousness am I greeting people with the narrative about what is wrong with them? And why am I surprised by the dissonance that follows? Says, where there is injury, let me bring pardon. This is one way people do, like I do, tend to go to the biggest transgressions in the world first, when it is good to come home and land right here and see, is it possible for me to get over the small transgressions of my neighbor or my friend or my loved one when they say something that offends me? Am I able to do that? Am I able to drop it so that I am participating actively in creating an atmosphere, a culture that is characterized by forgiveness? Oh, how about this one? What's the next one? Doubt, faith. You know, that's something I could do better on when I inquired into this one. I could definitely say more to people when they do something that they are proud of, when they accomplish something or they do something that's just nice. I could do more. I tend to be very quiet about it. And yet I know if somebody says to me, you did well, that was a good job, I may not react overtly, but I carry it around like a gold star in my heart. So I know there is room for me to do that because it helps dispel doubt and causes courage to grow. I know it does. And what about despair? You know, despair, if you've ever been in it, is that state where you don't think it will ever get better and there's no hope. And when you're in that state, it's very difficult to think of being a purveyor of it, of giving it away. I can see that. And yet, you know, I've got examples in my life where other people have brought that to me and through their example, given me the courage to do it again for others. I remember a story of when I was a young man, and I wrote about that in my book, Ordinary Goodness. And I forget which grade I was in, but the boys in school were teasing me relentlessly because they had detected that I was gay. And so they would just endlessly pick on me and tease me. And I remember one day in particular, I was sitting at the bus stop after school on the sidewalk, feet in the gutter, I remember, and they were just standing around me, talking, taunting, and I remember feeling that despair that says, this will never change. This will never get better. And I don't know if I could have thought up a way to bring hope into the situation. And yet it came from someone else. Another young man in the same grade as me came and he sat down right next to me in the gutter and started talking to me as if there was nothing wrong. But I remember looking over at him as he sat there and seeing his hand shaking. He was terrified because he knew he had put himself at risk for being ridiculed and associated, and yet he did it. And I'll never forget that moment that taught me that in moments where I identify other people in their despair, to speak up for the disenfranchised, for the underdogs, for the bullied, for when injustice is present, and to do so even though I'm shaking in my boots. Darkness, let me bring light. I had to sit with that one. It's another one of those things that we metaphysicians don't like to deal with. We are very strong in affirming the light in us. And yet, if we can sit in safety with each other and inquire, and where do I not bring light into the world? Where is what I am birthing or a purveyor of a few shades darker than bright? And you know, I don't like to admit it, probably no more than you do, but I find it. And I find it with less shame than I used to, and with more of a willingness to look it in the face and say, I'm stuck here. And to ask, how may I bring light into play? Now, the true secret of metaphysics is articulated in the next lines of the prayer, because the prayer shifts the focus of the one praying away from getting anything to giving everything. It says, O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, even to be understood as to understand others, to be loved as to love. And it occurred to me, I don't have to tell anybody about my inner process. Sometimes I can feel the addiction that I have to now explain to you the shift I've had so you can feel better with me. I see this as part of my addiction to being understood. So the true call of the metaphysician is to inquire within first, and to see if I can understand without controlling you. That's a lifelong curriculum right there. Phew. So the question is, what can I do to shift the focus from my perceived or real experience of need to where I have the possibility of stimulating the flow? Because it says in the prayer, it is in the giving that the receiving is wrapped up. That's right where it is. So my challenge for you today then is, as you go about through the world, whomever you encounter, whatever you do, to bring in your heart the silent gift of an affirmation about that person's soul. Oh, you can fully expect a shift to take place in the flow of good in your life. Now, I would keep it clean. Always keep what's going through your mind in that greeting non-physical, non-action related. Look with your spiritual eyes beyond appearances to the truth of their being and say it to yourself as you greet them, or whether they're serving you in a restaurant or checking you out at a supermarket. And watch what happens. You'll jumpstart your good. I invite you to breathe in with me and to exhale, letting your eyes close. Infinite Spirit within, everywhere present and ever active, I acknowledge you as the great architect of the universe, the presence of good everywhere, the lover of life, God, the living Spirit. I acknowledge that everywhere I go, I live and breathe and have my being within you. And even though I may use you to address God, I'm realizing I'm talking about something that is closer than my neck vein, something in which I am immersed. Love, eternal and absolute. And so with this in my mind, then, I declare my willingness to be a purveyor of the infinite self-givingness of God as expressed through me. And if any of this rings true for anyone, I invite you to accept it and identify it in your own prayerful state. As we pray together in this way, saturating our thought with the love of God and our intention to express it in the world, something moves. Call them the spiritual laws of life, responding to us so that we can take it for granted. Something new is set in place. For this I do give thanks, and together we say, and so it is.